Yes.
Yes. So we have 4 guests today from a variety of different backgrounds. On the right, we have Michael John Lockie. He's from Hampton Court. He's of the Buddhist faith. He's a former student at the Sheephead School, the site that yes, right. Very widely travelled. He's lived in Thailand for 7 years. Thailand, yes. And he works in the film industry. And on his right is Nana Ajiman Jantua. He originates from Ghana. Educated at the Ahmadiyya.
Indicates that, yes.
He's educated at the Ahmadiyya College in Kumasi. He tells me that he was there when Mr. B.K. Ado was teacher of English.
Right.
Since then, he has pursued his studies both in this country and in America. He's a qualified lawyer and works in a practice in North London. He's recently set up a foundation, and the objective of which is, and I quote, is to heal the remnants of slavery through forgiveness. Next, if we move on, is Mr. David Thorpe. He hails from Basingstoke. He's an accountant by profession, but he's also been a teacher. He's taught in primary schools, and he's taught at a technological college, statistics and accounts.
Have we met before? Yes.
He engages in various enterprises, and in recent times he's exploring the possibility of setting up a business trading in commodities and futures.
What sort of commodities?
Staple commodities, but futures in those commodities.
Good. Allah bless you in this business, mashallah.
Right. Finally, we have somebody who's not a stranger to sessions like these. I understand he's been here before. Is Mr. Ahmad Riaz.
Yes, I know him.
He's a manager in a psychiatric department that serves hospitals in Edgware and around Edgware. He originates from Dublin. He accepted Ahmadiyyat in November last year. These are our guests. Your question.
My question is on the negative side of, given by news and media of fundamentalism of the Middle East as against the more, should we say, mainstream Islam of the West. And how do the people of the Muslims of the West intend to combat the negativity of fundamentalism?
The problem is that the Muslim countries themselves help this propaganda against them, because they have to address their own people as well, where fundamental does rule supreme because of the influence of the mullah there. The common man is of 2 types. One is who is totally ignorant of whatever is happening, does not care for his moral values, anything, but he knows, he has learned his lesson that he must follow the mullah. And the mullah has also trained him in hating West and the Western values. So as such, largely the Muslim countries or the people at the helm of their affair are afraid of this large mass of people under the influence of mullah. But it does not stem from their love of Islam. Not in the least. Because if it stemmed from the love of Islam, they should have taken care of their moral values. They should have tried to behave more like Muslims, as demonstrated to us by the conduct of Hazrat Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So there is a vast difference between fundamentalism as understood by the West or as practiced by the Muslim countries, common masses, and the fundamentalism of the Quran and the conduct of the Holy Prophet. They're poles apart. No such fundamental behavior as you understand it to be today is found in the conduct of Ahmad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that positively shows that it is not out of love for Islam that the leadership of the Muslim countries is addressing their own people, not condemning the fundamental values. Whenever they condemn when they are at the receiving end. When other people are, they don't care. So there is a lot of hodgepodge in the politics and religion of the world today. Not only in Middle Eastern countries or Muslim countries, but also in the West. Look at the hodgepodge of his poor country, Ireland. What's happening there? In whose name? In the name of Christ. Look at all your previous centuries of extreme so-called Christian fundamentalism. There was nothing of either Christianity or fundamentalism about that. But it blemished the image of Christianity throughout the world. Now it's being suppressed, of course, for political ends. But it's there. You can't deny the existence of that phase. More religious the Western people were, the more fanatic they were. There is no gainsaying that. So the question you have raised requires so many answers to so many problems which are attendant upon this question. So I think that should, for the time being, suffice.
Let's
Thank you.
suffice and follows my own thinking.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Yes, please. Our own Ghanaian friend and
Thank you. Your Holiness.
student of Abu Sahib, eh? He will be very happy to learn that he appeared here in this class when he appears in our Urdu class.
He tells me he was very tough. He's a very tough teacher.
Well,
This is what I've been
still
told.
is. Yes, please.
Your Holiness, my question regards to the divine principle of forgiveness, which is common to all faiths, and the slave trade. During the recent visit of President Clinton to Africa, in particular Ghana, President Rawlings was quoted in the British press as saying that the slave trade still chilled the hearts of Ghanaians.
What?
The slave trade still chilled the hearts
Of
of
Ghanaians.
Ghanaians. Right. And when President Clinton went on to Uganda, he is quoted as stating that Americans benefited from the slave trade. Since we're getting up to the millennium, isn't it imperative that the victims of the slave trade should exercise forgiveness
To what effect?
to their, because there seems to be remnants of the slave trade, which
You see, forgiveness of a sinner does not mean anything unless the sinner is repentant. That is the fundamental point which must be understood by all the people of the world, whatever religions they follow. Forgiveness of a sinner while he continues to sin will be a disaster, because then he will be egged on to more sins. So forgiveness must follow repentance. You change this relationship and you can achieve nothing in the world. This is what is happening all over the world. There is a growing tendency, even in the West, here in England, to forgive the sinner, in the sense that children, for instance, when they commit sins, the society says they're children, but they have learned their lesson as well at the same time, and the number of years which are required for somebody to be called a child is lowering. Evidently, because they understand that the sin, if ignored at the time of childhood, will be encouraged. Once it is encouraged and it jumps into the streets, there is no holding it back. It becomes fixed in the nature of the person. So if you look back here on the record of all the sinners who have gone to jail, who have committed heinous crimes, if you trace their childhood, this would be the answer. In their childhood, they committed similar sins at home, in the streets, at schools, and they were not punished strongly enough because of their young age. So at the time when they should have been punished, they were not punished. When the sin got fixed into their character, it went into their fiber. Then the society realized, come on, let's reform them. It's not possible. There is a duality of character in the whole of the Western societies, because they discourage the parents of the children to take firm action against their misbehavior. It's happening everywhere. On the one hand, they discourage them from taking disciplinary action, and sometimes they are punished for doing that. Homes are offered them, such belligerents, to do whatever they like. And when their criminal intent is fixed into their character, then they start taking noticing. So what decisions, what contradiction? So just, you may start a movement to forgive, but it will abet crime rather than help reform the criminals. Right? Thank you.
Azur, my question is to do with the nature of God.
Yes.
The idea that appeals to me is that God is within each of us.
God
is within each of us.
Yes.
And I would
And also remote from each other.
Indeed.
Both. This is the complete statement, not the half of it. Please continue.
Really, all I wanted to ask you was how does that reconcile with the Muslim view of the nature of God?
You have already expressed it. According to the Holy Quran, God is closer to man than he himself is.
Right.
In the sense that when mind begins to take action of one's conduct, before that, God is there in his heart or in his mind. This is a very interesting statement of the Holy Quran, which means that he is so close that whenever you commit sin against his wishes, then you are held responsible, because he was there when you did it. So that shows that he is also distant, because you commit sins despite his presence, which means that you have not registered his presence. And those who have not registered the presence of God, according to the degree of their unconscious, degree of their oblivion, God is removed away from them. So according to the Holy Quran, he is farthest from man than man can think of. Farthest in the sense of the nature of the existence of God, of course, we understand that. But also farthest in the sense that being closest, he is being treated as farthest. And this is the dilemma which the whole society faces today, unfortunately. This is the view of the Quran and There are so many other verses of the Quran which elaborate this view. So I'm not putting words to in the mouth of the Quran. It is the Quran which says that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please.
Assalamu alaikum, Hazur.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
I would like to address a question to you on the subject of purdah.
Apada, yes.
And also, if possible, perhaps you could clarify one of the things. My question is influenced by a recent visit that I had to my hometown in Dublin, in Ireland.
Right.
When I left there about 5 years ago, there were very, very few Muslims living in Ireland. When I was home last, I was walking around the city centre with one of my sisters. And on two separate occasions, we passed two different groups of young Muslim girls who were wearing hijab, scarf. And I was watching my sister.
From where they were, which country did they belong to?
I'm not sure. There is a big.
Well, it's also very important to learn which country they belong to.
I know that there are about 30 Ahmadi doctors
Yes.
working in Dublin,
Yes.
but there is a big there's big import and export of meat to Iran and Iraq. So there are a lot of Muslims from those countries working
Yes,
in
that's
Ireland.
right.
Anyway, I was watching my sister's reaction to this, and on both occasions, she didn't mind. She didn't even notice. These people, these Muslims, are so familiar in Dublin. But a little
What
later,
religion does she hold?
she's no faith.
No faith. That
No
is why
faith.
she did react.
But I was watching her reaction because she is still a little
She was
bit.
not interested in these things, so why should she have shown any reaction?
Because she is a little bit uncomfortable still with her brother becoming a Muslim.
That is what I have been speaking about many times before, that this is the sign of your truth.
Hmm.
No reaction would occur in a society which does not care for God when they observe God being depicted wrongly. They don't care. Let God suffer for this blemish by the behavior of the people who relate to Him, their conduct. So they do not care at all. But when they observe strictly godly values in persons, and they know these values have the potential to spread, they very strongly react against that. It happens everywhere in every society. Christian society in the early period is no exception. Why did they react against Christ and those who followed Him? Did they plead a violent revolution in the society? Quite on the other hand. They pleaded softness, sacrifice, forgiveness, and offering the other cheek if one is hit. But the reaction of the society was very severe against him. Why? The same thing as happens here. They recognize the presence of divine influence on that society, in those people. They knew they could not have changed without deep-seated belief in God. And because that deep-seated belief in God was changing their conduct, their behavior, in a manner that was completely at odds with the rest of the society. At the same time, they noticed and registered the fact that they are spreading, their message is spreading. Their message has the potential to spread, which was proved later on by history. So this deep realization of the antagonist is in fact born out of a subdued atheism. In the name of God, they actually do not belong to God. like in this case, wherever in the name of God you do not belong to God, or you openly say there is no God, I don't believe, the reaction is always the same. Whenever they discover God anywhere, they hate that and they show a violent reaction against any society which is truly godly. Not always truly godly at every stage of its development. But one thing happens, and they notice this, that those who begin to close upon these people, or those who belong to the early converts, their character from then on is influenced in the sense that they begin to move towards God. Little by little, they shed the burden of the previous social habits and values. So what happens? They move away from the society, in fact. More they move towards God, although yet they are not perfect. Right in the beginning, I have noticed throughout the behavior of Ahmadi converts that in the beginning they are full of defects and blemishes, no doubt. But once they accept Ahmadiyya, the sure sign of their truth and sincerity is that they begin to move away bit by bit from the previous values of society to a different form of the concept of life. This also hurts the society. The people who are taken away from them in their character bit by bit, but they're moving away. So these are so many factors which are responsible for the behavior of your sister. In you, she knows this man is not going to be ours forever, because his values are different. They have become different. And from now on, he must move away and further away. So what use would he be to our house, to our social system and so on? I think psychologically, you are a psychologist, aren't you? You work in psychiatrist, that is, you have to be a psychologist. So I think these are the reasons why she's behaving the way you have noticed. Right?
You've answered my question fully, sir. Thank you.
Oh,
It's your turn again. Go
it's my
round
turn
and
again.
round.
Yeah, okay. Your Holiness, my upbringing, this is, I would like your reaction, if possible, to a statement. My upbringing was, I think fortunately, not an enforced Christian upbringing. Although I attended church, I found no great value from this experience. And in my head, my heart, I refuted the stories. Some years ago, I became a Buddhist. Not by continually going to temple, but through meditation and arriving at a conclusion whilst in meditation of a way of life, not necessarily of a Buddhist way of life or of an Islamic way of life, but a way of seeing my life. This has caused certain separations from myself, from my past friends, my past existence, to one that I have now. I had to make decisions that I had to cut away that part of my life in order to be able to continue with another way of life. How do you see the similar pathways of Islam as against as a person converting to Islam from any other faith? Do you see that?
You
Or
have
they ran
there is
concurrently?
a very profound issue which relates, among other things, to the very nature of Buddhism and its essence. again, it relates to your concept of life here on earth and your non-belief in the life afterwards. To a degree, if you are a Buddhist of the modern times, then they don't believe in God. Those who believe,
not in a
yes,
form.
that's right, yes. Those who believe, they believe in deities, they believe in plurality of Godhead, because that is how God is practiced in Tibet, in most places. So there is a great dilemma about Buddhism, what it is, what is the nature of Buddhism. Fortunately, I am in a position now to answer all the relevant questions because I have made a deep research into the origin of Buddhism, into the behavior of its slow, gradual development and the direction it took, and also on the identity of Buddha. What identity can we attribute to him? Now, different Buddhists at different stages of history have been attributing different identities to Buddha. Therapitaka is a very sure proof of what I am telling you. Different inferences were drawn at different times, and most of those inferences were wrong. The only inference about Buddha's personality with which I agree fully was the inference of Ashoka. Ashoka was the most faithful, loyal servant of Buddha. And his empire is an evidence in favor of what I am saying, because he appeared around 300 years after Buddha. And during those 300 years, whatever changes had taken in the society, he must have been guided by God, Ashoka, to understand what Buddha was. So all over the rocks and stupas, what he has inscribed is that he was a messenger of God, not a God himself. He was not godless. And this message was spread across Afghanistan and elsewhere, wherever this empire extended. There is absolutely positive assertion that Buddha was sent by God. He was neither God nor a godless person. His being a godless person is also denied. So his position, as we understand the position of prophets of Allah and the messengers of Allah, exactly tallies with that. If you study the writings of Ashoka with greater depth and more attention. But what supports it further is the Buddhist record, which is described to be contained in baskets. And in many of these baskets, although things are said which are contrary to the reality of Buddha, yet there are definite confessions in those baskets that Buddha believed in God, believed in the world to come, believed that he had come from God, and believed that he would return to him, and believed that he also lived here while on earth with God. So this is exactly the concept of the Holy Quran. You come from God and return to him, but you can only return to him in spirit if you live with him while here on earth. Now, I do not see the slightest difference in Buddha's teaching as regards to this three-phased assertion.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I think your wording is put in a different form, but I understand the concept
That's right.
of that you're explaining to me. Thank you very
Now,
much.
instead of further elaborating the same issue, you have given me an opportunity to declare today, to announce today, that the book which I have been writing and correcting for the last 8 or so years, because I didn't have much time to sit at one time and attend the book from beginning to the end. So it created many repetitions and vague ideas which were clarified once and they were clarified at another time in a different way, and so on and so forth. So it took me a lot of struggle to find time to sit together once and for all and finalize this book. So with the grace of Allah, during the last few months particularly, I have been taking pains to do that despite my other responsibilities during the hours of the night and the day, whenever I found time. There was a team of Ahmadi girls and boys who were helping me in this task to revise the whole book altogether once and for all. This book has a chapter on Buddha. And all that I have said, and now the announcement which I want to make now with the grace of Allah is that having been finalized, completely revised, with whatever mistakes there are, Allah knows better, but in our opinion, all the retouches necessary have been done. Now this book has been now sent to an American scholars team who are preparing the index. So it could not have been done without its being finalized. Today I have got the good news that the revised version has been transmitted to America, to the team of the Ahmadi scholars who were to prepare the index. It will take perhaps another month or two for publication, but that will be not my fault. That is not fault, but the, say, compulsion of the company which is going to publish it on our behalf. It's a huge book of more than 850 pages, including this syllabus. No, I'm looking at this index, of course. It may approach around 900 or some, but it covers all the subjects of my lifelong pursuits, which I have tried to pay attention to during different periods of my life. And these, I believe, are all the subjects which agitate the modern human mind. So I think everybody cannot have patience to read all the book from the beginning to the end, because there will be scientific jargon, there will be subjects discussed which do not interest him at all. There will be philosophies and so on, isms like I have said. But for your interest, Buddhism would be a chapter which you must read. Because whatever I have said, I have given enough reason to support what I have said in that book, and the various scholars' view, Western scholars' views, how their views evolved gradually, and what is the present opinion. Of course, I do not agree with the present opinion either, but the understanding of Buddhism has definitely evolved in the minds of the Western scholars to a degree that it has come closer to my understanding, as I think, but yet not altogether there. So it will be for you to decide.
It would be an interesting
Yes.
read. Thank you.
Next, please.
Your Holiness, my question relates to honesty.
Honesty.
Yes.
Very good. That's the best thing you have said so far.
At a recent meeting of international students in a university in the north of England, there was a consensus about the idea that honesty paid socially but not politically. What do you think about that?
Just rubbish. Honesty, if adhered to firmly and without any connotation other than universality, always pays in the end. It never fails. But if it's not adhered to, the resultant chaos and damage to politics, to morality, to human values is irreparable. So whether it pays immediately or after a long time, it's irrelevant in the sense that whenever you do not pay attention to honesty in its absolute value, then you begin to cause harm to every sphere of life. So it's essential.
So what about in times of persecution? If groups of peoples or a particular person is cornered, what do they do?
This has been the main issue which concerns Ahmadis in Pakistan. The Quranic teaching, which I have elaborately discussed in other places, here only I'll refer to them in the gist of the contents. The Quranic teaching is that the best thing one should do or one can conceive to do is to be ready to sacrifice everything for the sake of truth. That is honesty. And these are the people whom God loves. Yet God pays attention to human weaknesses as well. All people are not brought up exactly alike. And the resultant character is so different that some are brave and some are very weak and cowardly. The background has, the social, environmental background has produced these differences. Now the Holy Quran requires man to be honest to whatever he has been gifted with. In the area of his potentials, he must be honest. If he cannot tolerate the pressure against it, then naturally there will be a point then he will break down at no fault of his. So when it comes to that limit, when he must break down, God will forgive him. Even if he confesses things which he does not believe in, because he has no option. You know, he doesn't have that strong strength, that potential in him to go beyond the limit of his character. So when Allah knows that somebody has done it after reaching the maximum of his level of toleration, then God will be forgiving to him, provided that in his heart he does not change his concept of truth. Right?
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
So my second question is to do with communication with God, particularly through worship. I have attended worship in the mosque and read something about it, and it seems to be that I might be wrong, but that the same thing happens day after day after day, and that's intentional, of course. In churches, things change from day to day, from week to week, but the basis is there, but the details change. My own idea is that it is an entirely personal thing, and one communes with God on a personal basis, although sometimes collectively with other people. I'd be interested to know how, when you are going through a fixed form of worship, you are able at the same time to communicate with God?
No one is able to communicate with God. God is able to communicate with people He deems fit. And this is a very perplexing problem on which I have spoken for more than 50 hours or so in my sermons, trying to explain all the delicate dividing lines between a man truly in communion with God and not truly in communion with God, while he thinks he is. The criterion is very simple. It never fails. If God has chosen any of His servants for His communion, that servant of His must show divine signs in his character and must notice them himself. He must realize that he is getting closer to God, and at every step he gets closer to God, he has to shed some evil in him, some wrong value, and drop it on the path. While when he proceeds further, he will be less burdened with worldly things, because at every step he has to shed off something. And this is a conscious effort, and a knowledge of what is happening is possessed far more than the person himself than anybody else. This is the true criterion by which you can judge yourself, but also in the same process the world around seems to judge him in a manner that is a complement to his own subjective judgment. Objectively, the people around him notice that something is changing in him. Some evils are being dropped, and every day, if not every day, for every period of time, he is changing. And changing in a direction which I have explained before, away from the society towards God, but at the same time he is changing in the direction of society as well. It's never a path away from the society. It's always, whenever he communes with God in the right sense, he must return to the society as a reformed person. And he should be kinder to the society, more tolerant to the society, but not tolerant to the ills. He should be kind to the sinner, but not to the sin. This is what divides a truly godly person from that who is not. So any subjective experience by which man thinks that he is closer to God, he has received revelation and things, if not subject to these two conditions, is just imagination. Such imaginations are found everywhere in every religion. When it comes to that change which I have referred to, two-way change, which the man should know himself and the society should also support that this is true, then of course he is in communion. Otherwise he could not have manifested this fantastic revolution in himself. Right? Please.
Is there, if you please, the Christian concept of Adam being the first man on earth? Can you explain the within Islam, what relevance, if any, Darwin's
Which Christian context you're talking about?
that God created Adam out of Eve, all that?
Of course God created everything.
but that Adam was the first man on earth.
Which Adam are you talking about?
The Christian Adam.
Who occurred a few thousand years ago?
Mm-hmm.
But that Adam had been created
Out of
a
dust
billion
and-
years before that. Because when the first biotic unit came into existence, it did not come into existence because God wanted to create that unit. It came into existence because God wanted to create man. Throughout the evolution, this is the true understanding of evolution. It's a guided evolution. And the proof is that the first bricks of life, which made the first biounits, are a marvel in themselves, which man with all his advanced knowledge cannot create. So although many biologists believe that there is no concept of any sudden creation in God and in godly creations, we always find evolution and development. And they ignore the fact intentionally that the evolution could not have taken place until the first biounit was perfected. And it was perfected in the sense that it had all the characters and genes and chromosomes, etc., the potential for these chromosomes and genes in the first brick of life, DNA, call it DNA or RNA. How could this evolve? They have never offered any explanation of the evolution of the bricks of life, and they cannot, because it's a so complicated affair, so impossible to have happened by chance, and also without any previous trace of its evolution, that the scientists keep dumb over it and begin to talk of evolution after the first step has been taken. That first step went on and on, being a common factor to life. So all they talk about life is founded on the creation of that first brick of life, for which they have no evolutionary explanation. So all the rest is just simple wishful thinking, They want to move away from God, so they have invented the cliche of natural selection. Of course, there are selections on the way, but every selection requires a prior creation, and natural selection is not creator. Natural selection cannot enforce anything in the system and the mechanism of production. They are controlled by the genes, by the cellular tissues, which have been created and perfected before natural selection came into being. This is the dilemma which they avoid, of course, but if they delve deep into their own selves, they must admit that this is no way of putting scientific ideas, because the only reason why they do not analyze the situation further is they do not want to admit the existence of God. To shun that existence, they have overloaded them with scientific problems which they cannot resolve without admitting the third factor of God, who combines in him both the creation and selection. Because unless you create with a design to select the right thing from that creation, you cannot create anything without being the selector in the end. And if you do create without the selection in mind, then the course of evolution will go topsy-turvy in every direction. It cannot be cannot evolve in the same direction, which can only be possible if the creator and the selector are one and the same thing. He creates with a view to lead evolution to the point where man is created. And throughout the history of evolution, there is very strong incontrovertible evidence in favor of what I am claiming. So that also has been discussed in some places in minutest detail in the book which I just mentioned, The Grace of Allah. And if you are interested, of course, you can read that as well, apart from Buddhism. Right?
Thank you.
Please. Again, your turn.
Again my
Yes.
turn. You seem to have covered most of my questions with
Very
many
good.
of your answers.
Remember, note the addresses of all the intellectuals who come to this meeting,
Yes.
to send them a gift on my behalf of this book when it is ready,
Yes.
after when it is published.
Yes.
Right? Right. Please.
It's very. You've covered so many directions.
Yes.
My
If you have
change
no
of
question, you can make an observation.
An observation.
Yes, please.
my changes of my living of my way of life, my considerations, my thoughts were primarily brought about by meditative processes,
Right.
which in turn led to a religious discovery.
Every discovery.
To every discovery. Exactly.
Yes,
Yes,
that's
exactly. This meditative process has led me to consider future lives, because I feel that within this one life there is not the possibility that I can achieve the perfection that is necessary to continue. Do you have any observations on
Yes.
this, Your Holiness?
I have one observation to make on the dependability of this process to guide you to truth. The problem is, that's why I said not religious, meditative process is essential for everything. For sciences, of course. But can't you see, differentiate or differentiate different results of this meditative process in science and faiths and religions and isms? In science, meditative processes have always moved in the direction of bridging the gaps of different opinion holders, with the result that finally, when they declare a phenomenon or anything they discover to be correct and true through their meditative processes, all over the world, all scientists, through their meditative processes, reach the same result. But this does not happen in isms, in faiths and things. The results they reach are different. So how could it be possible that God created nature in a manner that all facts converge to one single truth? That is the oneness of God. While in religions, all common results or the products of meditation lead you into the concept of a God who differs so much and continues to differ, that he appears to be one thing to one person who meditates, another thing to another person who meditates. So there has to be some scientific attitude essential for every person who meditates. And he should draw his lessons from science and the scientist's behavior. And then realize how just by his own meditation he can reach God. That is a very difficult challenge. And I hope you will find it resolved to a degree in the book which I have just mentioned.
Thank you.
I've taken it up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please.
Your Holiness, my third question relates to the Arab-Israeli conflict.
Right.
I spent my early years in Tel Aviv during the Six-Day War in 1967.
Is it right? Yes.
Right, where my parents were posted there on Ghana's diplomatic service. Is this a conflict of siblings? The Judaism and Islam being the younger brother or sister, as it were. And when is it going to end?
It's not going to end. Not until the very cause of this is uprooted altogether. Today you notice the conflict between the Jewish world and the Arab world. Judaism is a religion. Arabism is no religion. So to begin with, you are making a wrong contrast. You are putting religious values on the one hand and so many different entities enrolled into one concept of Arabism on the other. This is not true. There are Christians among Arabs. And what about the Jewish attitude to Christians earlier in the history? And what about the Christian reaction to those attempts to monopolize their power and their culture and their economy, etc., everything in fact? The reaction has always been very violent. But the problem with the reaction of the Arabs to these are different in the sense that whenever Christian powers reacted against Jewish attempt to monopolize their life, they were powerful enough to rebut that efforts and to frustrate them. Everywhere this is the history is unfolded. The Christians had become too powerful for the Jewish to take them, trivially, to treat them trivially. So there was a time they were taking these things because there is a strange dilemma. The Jewish rise to power also helped the economies of the countries in which they lived. They helped the sciences to develop. So it is a strange dilemma. On the one hand, they were useful, and that is how they were tolerated to a degree. But when their usefulness ended up in their vision that now we can pounce upon everything and own these people as permanently enslaved to our values, that was the time of reaction. That is exactly what happened in the Nazi reaction against the Jewish people. And they were wrong in cruelties, but they were right in their analysis. So this is a very big question you have raised and requires many answers, and furthermore elaboration is needed. But the time is over, and I think that should suffice for the time being.
Thank you very much.
15 seconds, 14 seconds, and that's all. So I thank you all for coming. And I would like you to come again.
I've enjoyed the meeting. It was a surprise. There have been some nice points of view put, and I accept them, and it's worth thinking about.
I'm very happy that you're carrying home some food for thought.
Thank you for those.
That's very good. So I will invite you to come again and also to study this book in all the areas which have been agitating your mind.
Thank you.
I hope very much that all intellectuals who are not biased would agree with my opinions expressed in this book. Thank you.
Thank you.